It's Nicola here at the Disasters Emergency Committee on day 13 of our East Africa Crisis Appeal. And today I am joined by Tom Parry from the Mirror. Tom travelled to Somalia 2 weeks ago and wrote this story for the Mirror. He met baby Hamdi 2 weeks ago when he was there, and then sadly the baby Hamdi died a week ago. Tom, tell us about your visit to Somalia.
We travelled with Save the Children to the city of Garowe, which is in Puntland in northern Somalia, and we were there for just over 3 days. During that time, one of the first places we went to was the malnutrition clinic just on the edge of Garowe, and it was there that we saw Hamdi. We visited the clinic again at the end of the trip, by which stage her condition had deteriorated further. She was in a ward of about 10 children approximately, all with their mothers. And even though all of the children in the ward were extremely vulnerable, very acutely malnourished, Hamdi's case really stood out for me because of the other complications that she was suffering. Prior to this particular trip, I've covered droughts and the previous famine in Somalia for the Mirror, but this, I'd never really realised that it's the other illnesses that children in particular pick up that often lead to them being very, very vulnerable or sometimes them dying.
And this is a particularly devastating story. As you say, it was only a week after you visited that you found out that Hamdi had died. Tell us how you found out.
I received an email from one of the Save the Children staff in Somalia. I'd asked him if he could keep me updated. I also was contacted by Kevin Watkins, the CEO of Save the Children, who found out the same news that day. And I was really, really struck by what it was particularly awful having met Hamdi, having spoken to her mother at length just the previous week. It really brought it home to me how acute this situation is, how it's something that is getting more and more serious by the day. The doctors had told me that they were experiencing record numbers in the previous weeks and they were expecting that to increase, and it made me realise how desperate it is that the resources they have at their disposal are increased.
And tell us, I mean, you visited there with DEC member charity Save the Children, and you know, really sadly with this case, baby Hamdi wasn't saved, but I know that Save the Children are doing amazing work there. And so tell us what they are doing and the children that they are helping with the donations from the British public.
Right. Well, first of all, at this clinic in Garowe, my understanding is that they are helping to fund that clinic. If it didn't exist, there wouldn't be anything at all for 200 miles in any direction, which gives you an idea of the size of the space that they have to cover. In the clinic, they provide the premises. They paid towards the costs of the wages of the staff there, and also vital medicines, high nutrition foods that wouldn't otherwise exist. What they also do is go out to very remote communities. We travelled to a camp that was about 3 to 4 hours away from Garowe in the middle of the desert, and it's difficult to imagine that anybody else would even know of its existence. It was that desperate. There were no proper roads there. It was just sort of a place that people had congregated together, because if they didn't gather in large groups, I think they almost certainly would die from the exposure in the desert. Save the Children is taking medical teams out there and distributing food as well in the nearby villages. So it's really providing a lifeline that wouldn't exist otherwise.
Yeah, one of the amounts of money that we ask our donors to give is £25 for a month's supply of Plumpy Nut, which is a life-saving peanut paste that can bring a child back from the brink of starvation. Did you see that in the clinics that you visited?
We did, yes, particularly at the outreach clinic. I had a quick peek around the storage room next door, and I noticed that those sachets had been brought in. There were boxes on the floor that were ready to be distributed. And having seen the conditions there, there's obviously nothing is growing. No one has anything to trade with anymore because they were all relied on the livestock. That doesn't exist now. So without Plumpy Nut, there would be literally nothing. So that really brought it home for me how vital it is.
And another one of the figures that we have is £100 provides supplies to a clinic like the one treating Hamdi for a month. So that is what you've described, what you saw Save the Children providing on the ground. And the third amount of money we ask people for is £60 to help 2 families for a month with water. Did you see that in the place in the desert that you visited?
Yes, we did. They arrive with a huge plastic rubberized container, I suppose, that there's just perched on the edge of the settlement, and they have to go along with their containers and fill it up. So it's pretty rudimentary, and how often they receive that water depends on the amount of money coming in. The temperatures are so high that if they don't have water in places like that, then they would almost certainly be exposed to severe dehydration, I suppose.
I think so. I mean, we've heard this devastating story about Hamdi, and that's one child, but, I've seen, lots of coverage about the scale of this crisis, and we are talking about 16 million people on the brink of starvation. What did you see when you were there on the ground that brought that scale home to you?
Well, I suppose before even arriving in Garraway, what really brought it home to me was looking through the window from the plane travelling from Mogadishu on a UN flight, and there was absolutely nothing growing at all, no vegetation, there was no sign of life whatsoever, and to me that really brought it home. After I think about 3 hours in the air, I hadn't seen anything at all, any settlements, any way that people could sustain themselves. Really showed me how it's really on the edge of being able to survive. There's nothing there, and then on the ground it was 3-4 hours drive again with absolutely nothing at all. So,
yes, I don't think for people in the UK who haven't travelled overseas, the thought of not seeing anything green for 3 hours of flying is incredible.
Yes.
Now tell me, the Mirror, covered this story on the front page of baby Hamdi. How did Mirror readers respond?
I received quite a few emails from readers, people who no doubt have causes that they are particularly connected to here in Britain, and I imagine already give probably about as much as they can, but nevertheless, having seen the plight of Hamdi and reading about the other children that we featured in the paper, they said they would make a further donation, and they seemed very affected because they've realised, although it's very, very distant to their own lives, that just children in that particular predicament are so helpless. Anything that they can do, they will do, even if it's beyond what they would normally give to.
Well, I'd like to extend a big thank you to Mirror readers for all of their support of this appeal on behalf of the Disasters Emergency Committee and all of its member charities. As Tom has explained, the scale is vast, and he's seen firsthand the suffering of some of the children in Somalia in particular. As you know, it's on a large scale, and we can't wait. We mustn't delay. We need to get aid as soon as possible to East Africa to avert a complete catastrophe. So please, don't delay, donate.